If you insist on marrying a broke man, then from this moment on you're no longer my daughter, and you'll never see a cent of my money again." My father, the CEO of a huge real estate company, said that into the microphone at my own wedding reception. 6 months later, that same man sat shaking in our tiny living room, begging my poor husband to save his. As always, before we dive into a story with an ending that's going to feel really satisfying for you, let's do a quick roll call. Type present and the city you're watching from in the comments. For everyone who has liked and subscribed, I pray that Allah makes your problems easier, widens your provision, and keeps your body healthy. Thank you, my friends. Now, listen carefully to my story. My name is Clara, and for most of my life people knew me as the CEO's daughter. My dad, Richard Donovan, built a real estate and construction company from scratch. At least that's what everyone says when they introduce him. Big glass office, private driver, expensive suits that look like they cost more than a small car. We lived in a 3-story house in the suburbs with perfectly cut hedges, a chef in the kitchen, and a marble staircase that echoed every time you walked down it in heels. From the outside, it looked like a dream. From the inside, it was more like a very shiny cage. My mom passed away when I was 16, so it was just Dad and me after that. He never remarried, at least not on paper, but there were always women in designer dresses at his charity events, laughing at his jokes, calling him charming and brilliant. He treated them all like temporary accessories. The only person he said was permanent was me. "You're everything I have," he would say, resting his hand on my shoulder. "Everything I've built will be yours one day, as long as you don't throw your life away." I used to think that sounded like love. Later, I realized it was more like a contract. I studied business, obviously. There wasn't really a choice. He placed me in different departments in his company every summer. First HR, then finance, then marketing. He said it was so I'd learn the ropes, but everyone treated me differently, like I was a walking promotion letter. People were either too polite or too afraid. The first time I realized something was off was the day I told him I wanted to try working outside his company for a while. We were having dinner at home, sitting at the long dining table that could fit 10 people even though it was just the 2 of us. The housekeeper, Maria, had just cleared the plates when I put my fork down and took a breath. "Dad, I've been thinking," I said. "After graduation, maybe I could work at another firm first, get some independent experience." The clink of his glass against the table was so sharp that I flinched. "Independent from what?" he asked, raising his eyebrows. "From the company that pays for this house? For your car? For your education?" I swallowed. "It's not like that. It's just, I want people to see me as more than your daughter." He laughed, but it wasn't a nice laugh. "Why do you kids always want to find yourselves? You already have a place. At Donovan Real Estate. That's not something you try. It's your duty. Duty. Not choice, not passion, not dream. Duty." I forced a smile because that was easier than arguing. But that night, lying in my ridiculously big bedroom with its floor-to-ceiling windows, I stared at the ceiling and realized something. My future had already been drawn for me, and none of it had my handwriting on it. I didn't know that the next person who would really shake that future was brewing coffee in a small cafe less than 2 blocks from my dad's office. I met Ethan on a Tuesday when my phone died. It sounds like the start of a bad rom-com, I know, but that's literally what happened. I was supposed to send some files to my dad's assistant from a meeting, and of course my phone went black right after I walked out of the building. There was a small cafe on the corner, the kind nobody in my dad's circle bothered with because it didn't have valet parking or a fancy name. I walked in, panicking a little because I knew my dad hated delays, and went straight to the counter. "Hi, do you have a charger I could borrow?" I asked the guy behind the register. He looked up from the espresso machine. Brown hair a little messy, sleeves rolled up, a small smudge of coffee on his wrist. His name tag said, Ethan. He smiled. "Battery emergency?" "You have no idea," I sighed. "If my dad doesn't get these files, he'll probably send a helicopter to drag me back to the office." Ethan chuckled. That sounds dramatic. What kind of dad is this? The CEO kind, I said, half joking. Of Donovan Real Estate. He blinked. Wait, Richard Donovan? The guy whose face is on all those billboards? Yeah, that guy. Wow. He let out a low whistle. And here I am, just the guy who refills your caffeine. Trust me, I said. Right now you're more important than the billboard guy. Do you have a charger? He laughed and pulled one out from under the counter. Sit over there. I'll plug your phone in and bring you a coffee on the house. I'm guessing your blood pressure needs help. I sat near the window, and he brought over a latte with a little heart drawn in the foam. I'm not sure this will fix my relationship with my dad, I said, but it's a good start. It's not for him, Ethan said, leaning on the back of the chair beside me. It's for you. I remember my chest feeling strangely lighter in that moment. It was such a small sentence, but in my world everything was always for the company, for appearances, for Dad. Nobody ever framed anything as just being for me. We ended up talking until my phone reached 100%. He asked me about my job, and instead of getting intimidated by my last name like most people, he sounded more curious than anything. So, do you like it? He asked. Working there. I hesitated. I like parts of it. But sometimes it feels like I'm just continuing a script someone else started. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I get that. My dad wanted me to be an engineer. I tried it for a year and almost lost my mind in those classes. So I dropped out and started working here instead. Does he hate you for it? I asked. He shrugged. I don't know if he loves it, but at least now I can sleep at night, you know? I envied that so much it hurt. When I left the cafe, I had my phone at full charge, 2 saved files sent to my dad's assistant, and a name stuck in my head, Ethan. The guy who talked to me like I was just Clara, not the CEO's daughter. I told myself it was just a nice interaction. Just a random barista I'd never see again. But I kept accidentally needing coffee from that same place almost every afternoon. And every afternoon he was there. My father's world and Ethan's world could not have been more different. In Dad's world, lunches were at expensive hotels where waiters memorized your drink order. In Ethan's world, lunches were takeaway sandwiches eaten on the back step behind the cafe, legs stretched out, talking about music and weird customers. In Dad's world, conversations were about market share, land prices, and which politician was attending the next gala. In Ethan's world, conversation drifted to favorite books, painful childhood memories, ridiculous dreams like maybe opening his own tech company one day instead of just serving coffee. To my surprise, Ethan was actually working on something. I'm not just a barista, I promise, he joked one afternoon when he saw my curious look as he closed his laptop. I'm building a small supply chain app for independent cafes. Just trying to make it easier for owners to track orders and inventory. Nothing crazy. That sounds actually really smart, I said honestly. You're doing it alone? For now, he said. I don't have investors or anything. Just a code, obsessed brain and too much caffeine. But it's mine. The way he said that, it's mine, made something twist in my chest. I didn't have anything that was truly mine. It didn't take long before our conversations stretched beyond the cafe. We started texting. First about random memes and coffee jokes, then about deeper things. I told him about my mom, how the house felt emptier after she passed away. He told me about his parents. Small house in a different town, how they still reused plastic bags and worried about electricity bills. One evening I told him, sometimes I feel like my life looks better in photos than it feels from the inside. He replied, sometimes the poor guy with the cheap phone is happier than the billionaire who can't sleep. It's not always what it looks like. I don't know when exactly I fell in love with him. Maybe it was the day he took me to the park with food he cooked himself and said, "I know this isn't a fancy restaurant, but I wanted to make something with my own hands for you." Maybe it was when I cried about my dad's expectations and Ethan didn't tell me I was being dramatic. He just listened and said, "You're allowed to want your own life, Clara." The real problem started when my dad found out about him. It wasn't because I told him. Of course not. I was too scared of his reaction. It was because in my dad's world, nothing stayed hidden for long. It happened at one of those charity events my dad loved. Huge ballroom, crystal chandeliers, men in tailored suits, women in dresses that glittered under the lights. Dad was in his favorite dark blue suit, shaking hands with some investors. I was wearing a dress he'd picked out, of course. He liked choosing my clothes for events, said I was a reflection of the brand. "Smile," he whispered in my ear as we stepped into the hall. "Tonight is important. Don't embarrass me." I was used to that line, so I just nodded and fixed my expression. Everything was going fine until one of his friends, Mr. Bennett, walked up with a grin and a hand on my dad's shoulder. "Richard," he said, laughing, "you didn't tell me Clara's been having coffee with the commoners." My dad frowned. "What are you talking about?" Mr. Bennett waved his phone. "My assistant showed me this. Some candid photo on social media. Your daughter sitting in that little cafe near your office, laughing with some guy in an apron. People were commenting like crazy about how cute they looked." My stomach dropped. I didn't need to see the photo to know exactly which day it was. Ethan had made some joke about my serious business face, and I'd laughed so hard I almost dropped my cup. Dad took the phone. His face tightened as he zoomed in. He handed the phone back with a stiff smile. "Gossip sites have too much free time." Mr. Bennett chuckled. "Well, make sure she ends up with someone worthy of your name, yeah? Not some coffee boy." He walked away to get another drink, leaving a thick silence behind. I swallowed. "Dad, I can explain." "You can explain at home," he said through clenched teeth. "For now, you will stand next to me, smile at the camera, and remember that everything you do reflects on me." Understood. I felt like a child again. "Yes, Dad." That night, after the event, he called me into his study. The study was his territory. Dark wood shelves, a huge desk, framed pictures of him shaking hands with important people. I stood there feeling tiny while he stayed behind his desk like a judge. "Who is he?" he asked. I tried to keep my voice calm. "His name is Ethan. He works at the cafe." "I know where he works," Dad snapped. "I want to know what he is to you." I hesitated only for a second. "He's someone I care about." "So he's your boyfriend?" I exhaled. "Yes." He leaned back, laughing once, humorless. "A barista. My daughter, who could marry any man in the top 100 richest families, is seriously involved with a barista." "He's not just a barista, Dad. He's building." "I don't care what app or little project he's playing with," my father cut in. "Do you have any idea how you look? People already talk. They say you're naive, that I can't control my own daughter. Do you realize what that does to my image?" There it was again. Image. Brand. Reputation. Never my happiness. "I'm not a product, Dad," I said quietly. "I'm your daughter." He stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor. "You are my responsibility. And I did not build all of this," he gestured around the room, "for you to throw it away on some man who can't even afford a decent suit." Something in me snapped a little. "He can afford the things that matter," I shot back. "Respect. Honesty. Real conversations. Things you don't buy in stores." His eyes went cold. "So you're choosing him over your family?" I froze. "That's not what I said." "That is exactly what you're doing," he said, voice low and sharp. "Fine. Date him. But understand this, Clara. A man like that will never be a part of this family. And if you insist on staying with him, there will be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" I asked, but my voice came out smaller than I'd hoped. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made my skin crawl. You'll see. That night, lying awake in my big bed, I stared at the ceiling again. Only this time, instead of feeling trapped, I felt something else rising in my chest. Fear and love, mixed into one very dangerous decision. The first clear humiliation came a few weeks later, during a family dinner that wasn't really a family dinner. Dad had invited some business partners and their families. That was normal. What wasn't normal was the way he called me into his room a few hours before the event. "I want you to bring Ethan tonight," he said. I blinked. "You do?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. If he's going to be hanging around my daughter, I should at least see what kind of man he is. Invite him. Tell him to dress appropriately. Every alarm bell in my head went off, but a part of me hoped maybe this meant he was trying. Maybe he wanted to give Ethan a chance. I wanted to believe that so badly that I ignored my instincts. I texted Ethan. "Dad wants you to come to dinner tonight. I think he wants to get to know you. Can you make it?" He replied almost immediately. "I'll be there. I'll do my best not to spill anything on anyone." I smiled at my phone, but there was a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. That evening, the house was buzzing with staff, food trays going in and out of the kitchen, the dining table set with the fancy plates we only used for guests. I wore a dark green dress and tried not to show how nervous I was. When the doorbell rang, my heart jumped. I met Ethan in the foyer. He looked really good. He'd borrowed a suit from a friend, I could tell, because the sleeves were a little too long, but he'd done his hair, polished his shoes, and there was that same warm smile I always loved. "Hey," he said softly. "You look wow." I exhaled. "You clean up pretty nicely yourself." Before we could say anything else, my father appeared at the top of the stairs, looking down at us. "So this is Ethan," he said as he walked down, every step measured. Ethan turned and held out his hand. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Donovan. Thank you for inviting me." My father looked at his hand for a second too long, then finally shook it. "We'll see if you still thank me by the end of the night." Ethan glanced at me, confused. I forced a small smile, silently begging him to just ignore it. At first, dinner seemed okay. Awkward, but okay. There were two other couples at the table, Dad's business associates, Mr. and Mrs. Reed and Mr. and Mrs. Collins. They had brought their adult children too, Adam Reed, who worked as a finance manager at a bank, and Melissa Collins, a lawyer. The conversation started with safe topics: the food, the weather, some charity project. Then, somewhere between the salad and the main course, Dad cleared his throat and looked straight at Ethan. "So, Ethan," he said, "what do you do?" Ethan straightened a little. "I work at a cafe downtown, sir. And I'm also building a small software product for cafe owners." "A cafe?" Mrs. Collins repeated, eyebrows raised. "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said, still polite. "It's not a big place, but—" "Ah," my father interrupted. "So you serve coffee for a living?" The way he said, "serve coffee," made my cheeks burn. Ethan smiled slightly. "I do now, yes. And I'm working on turning the software into a proper business." Mr. Reed leaned forward. "You have investors?" "Not yet," Ethan said. "I've bootstrapped it so far." "So, no investors," my father said loudly enough that even Maria, who was refilling the water glasses, flinched. "No stable company. No assets." "Dad," I muttered under my breath. "Stop." He ignored me, eyes still on Ethan. "Tell me, how do you plan to provide for my daughter? She grew up in a certain lifestyle. You think coffee money is going to cover that?" The table went quiet. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he stayed calm. "With respect, sir, I don't see your daughter as a price tag. I see her as a person. And I believe in building something from the ground up. Your company didn't start as a giant, did it?" My father's eyes narrowed. Are you lecturing me on business in my own house? I'm just saying, Ethan replied carefully. Everyone starts somewhere. Mrs. Reed gave a fake little laugh. Well, Clara is very lucky. Some girls don't get to choose love when there's money on the line. My father nodded slowly, tapping his fingers on the table. Exactly. Love is cute when you're 20. But when the bills come, when the children come, love doesn't pay for private schools or medical care. Richard, Mrs. Collins said, I'm sure he's trying his best. My father smiled thinly. Trying doesn't keep the lights on, Elizabeth. Results do. I wanted to sink under the table. Dad, that's enough, I said, my voice shaking. You're being rude. He turned to me. I'm being realistic, Clara. Someone has to be. Do you think the world will be gentle with you because you fell in love with a dreamer? And you think people who aren't rich are worthless? I fired back. I think, he said, staring at Ethan again, that a man who truly loves a woman doesn't drag her down into his struggle. He steps aside and lets someone better take care of her. Ethan's hand tightened around his fork. His knuckles went white. I could see the hurt in his eyes, but he kept his voice steady. With all due respect, sir, he said quietly, I didn't drag your daughter anywhere. She walked into my life on her own. And I never promised her a palace. I promised her honesty. My father let out a low laugh. Honesty doesn't buy a house, son. The word son sounded like an insult coming from his mouth. The rest of the dinner dragged on like a slow car crash. Every time Ethan tried to say something, someone turned it into a joke about money or status. Every achievement he mentioned, finishing a complex piece of code, helping the cafe increase sales, was brushed off as cute or small. By the time dessert was served, my stomach was in knots. I barely touched my food. After the guests left, I walked Ethan out to his car. He shoved his hands in his pockets, staring at the ground. I'm sorry, I said, my voice cracking. I didn't know he would do that. I thought he wanted to. I don't know. I thought maybe he was trying. Ethan shook his head. Don't apologize for him, Clara. That's not your job. Tears burned behind my eyes. Do you hate me now? He looked up, surprised. What? No. Why would I hate you? Because you just sat through the worst dinner of your life, and it was in my house. He took a step closer, gently taking my hands. I knew your dad was rich, Clara. I didn't know he was that determined to remind everyone of it every 5 seconds. But I'm not with you for your last name. I'm with you for you. I let out a shaky breath. He'll never accept you. Then we'll have to decide if that's a deal breaker, he said softly. For us. Not for him. I knew what he was really asking. Was I willing to choose him, knowing what it would cost me? That night, after he drove away, I stood at the front door looking at the big Donovan crest carved into the wood. For the first time in my life, my own last name felt heavy, like a chain around my neck. From that day, my name in that house didn't feel like my name anymore. My father didn't yell the next day. That was somehow worse. Instead, he became strategic. He started inviting me into more meetings, talking about succession plans, introducing me to more suitable men at events. Sons of partners, young executives with expensive watches and practiced smiles. This is Nathan, he would say. He just closed a deal worth $8 million. Or, this is James. His family owns 3 hotel chains. Each introduction came with a subtle comparison. Look what you could have if you stopped playing with toys. At the same time, he increased the pressure at work. He made me sit in on budget meetings, client negotiations, crisis management calls. Whenever I made a small mistake, he highlighted it in front of others. You can't afford to be emotional in this position, he'd say. You want to make your own choices? Fine. Then grow up. Every time he said, grow up, what he really meant was, do what I want. He also started making comments about money in the smallest ways. We'd be looking at a new property, and he'd say, "You realize your boyfriend could never afford even the down payment for something like this, right?" Or we'd drive past the cafe, and he'd scoff, "That's where my daughter spends her time now. In a place where the furniture looks like it was rescued from a garage sale." It wasn't just criticism, it was a campaign. Every remark was designed to make Ethan seem small, and my dream of a different life seem childish. I tried to shield Ethan from the worst of it. I didn't tell him about every cruel comment. I just told him my dad didn't understand us. Yet the same time, Dad started bringing up more serious topics. One evening, he called me into his study again. This time he had a folder on the desk. "Sit," he said. I sat, my heart already racing. "Since you're so determined to make your own choices," he began, "we need to formalize your position regarding the company." He opened the folder and pushed some documents toward me. "This is an updated inheritance and trust structure," he said. "You're an adult now. It's time to put things in writing." I glanced at the documents. There were pages of legal language, trust provisions, succession terms, conditions. I didn't understand all of it, but certain words jumped out. Irrevocable, conditions, marital status. "What does this mean?" I asked slowly. "It means," he said, "that the assets I've placed under your name, and the shares intended for you, will remain secure as long as you fulfill certain basic expectations." "Like what?" I asked. He leaned back. "Like marrying someone who doesn't put everything at risk." There it was. On paper. In one clause, it said that if I married without his approval, certain assets would revert back to him. In another, it mentioned that he reserved the right to withhold distributions from the trust if he deemed my choices against the family's interests. "Is this even legal?" I whispered. He smirked. "Our lawyer says it's creative. But yes, it's legal." I stared at the words until they blurred. "So if I don't sign this, what?" "You disinherit me." "If you don't sign," he said calmly, "it will be complicated. Banks, investors, they like clarity. You want to play independent, fine. But don't expect me to leave my company's future hanging because my daughter can't decide if she wants to be a CEO or a barista's girlfriend." The way he said, "barista's girlfriend," made me feel like dirt. "This isn't fair," I said, my voice trembling. "You're basically saying I have to choose between love and money." He shrugged. "Love doesn't pay for lawyers when there's a contract dispute. Money does. I'm protecting what I built. If you want a part of it, you play by the rules." I knew I shouldn't sign. Every instinct screamed that these papers were a trap. But I also knew my entire life was tied to those assets. My college fund, my job, even the car I drove, it was all under the Donovan umbrella. I felt like someone who'd woken up halfway through a game they never agreed to play. "Can I at least have time to read everything?" I asked. He watched me for a second, then nodded. "Fine. Take it. But don't show it to that boy. This is a Donovan matter, not cafe gossip." I picked up the folder. My hands were shaking so badly I had to press it against my chest to keep it steady. Later that night, I sat in my room with the documents spread out on my bed. I didn't understand everything, but one clause in particular stuck with me. A part that mentioned exclusive development rights and technology partnerships. It said that any intellectual property I developed or significantly contributed to while working under the Donovan umbrella would automatically be owned by the company. At the time, I shrugged it off. I didn't have any intellectual property. I barely had time for hobbies. But out of habit, I took a photo of that page with my phone and emailed a copy of the entire document to my personal email, then also saved it on a USB drive I kept in my dresser. I told myself I was just being careful. I didn't know yet how important that small act would become. When I finally closed the folder, I put it back together and slid it into a drawer in my desk. I stared at the handle for a long time. It felt like I had just closed a box that was quietly ticking inside. As things got worse at home, I clung tighter to Ethan. He became my safe place. My days started to divide into two worlds. Donovan world, where everything was about control and image, and Ethan world, where it was okay to breathe and talk and be messy. My dad hated it. He started calling me at random times when he knew I might be with Ethan. If I didn't answer, he'd leave angry voicemails about responsibility and distraction. When I did answer, he'd say things like, "Are you with him again? Don't come crying to me when he leaves you for someone more convenient." He also started controlling who I could talk to. He complained that my aunt, who lived in another state, was encouraging my childish rebellion. He insisted I reduce contact with her because she didn't understand the business. My college friends. He called them drifters, and people who aren't going anywhere. He even tried to turn my co-workers against me. In meetings he would joke, "Clara's heart is in that cafe lately, not in this room." People laughed, but I saw the way they looked at me, like I was unreliable. One afternoon, after another tense meeting, I went to see Ethan. The cafe had a slow hour where there were only a few customers. I sat on a bar stool near the counter, watching him make drinks. "You look like you got hit by a truck," he said, sliding a glass of water toward me. "More like a luxury car driven by an angry CEO, I muttered. He leaned on the counter. "What happened?" "He showed me some documents," I said. "Inheritance stuff. Conditions." It's basically his way of saying, "I own your life, choose someone I approve of, or I cut you off." Ethan frowned. "Can he do that? Legally?" "Apparently, yes," I said bitterly. "Emotionally?" "He's been doing it for years." Ethan went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Clara, we need to talk about something." My heart dropped. That sounds ominous. He took a breath. "I love you." I blinked. "Okay, that's not ominous." He let out a nervous laugh. "I do. I love you. And I don't want to be just this guy you hide from your father forever. I want us to build something together. A future. A real one." I stared at him, my throat suddenly dry. Are you saying?" I whispered. "I'm saying I want to marry you," he said, his eyes steady on mine. "Not because I'm ready to fight your dad for the rest of my life, but because when I picture my life in 10 years, you're in it. Whether we're in a small apartment or a big house or something in between, I see you there. And I'd rather struggle with you than be comfortable without you." Tears filled my eyes. "Ethan." He reached out and took my hand. "I know what it means. I know what you'll lose. But I need you to know that if we do this, I'll work my hands raw to give you the best life I can. It won't be Donovan money, but it'll be honest. And I'll never hang it over your head." I thought about my father's study, the heavy contract, the threat in his eyes. And then I looked at Ethan, who was offering me something my father never truly did, a choice. "Yes," I said, my voice shaking but sure. "I want to marry you." He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for days. He pulled me into a hug right there behind the counter, and I could feel his heart racing against mine. For a few minutes, nothing else existed. Not the contracts, not the money, not the company. Just the stupid, reckless, beautiful idea that love might be enough. Reality, of course, came crashing back the second I told my father. "I'm getting married," I said, standing in his study again. He didn't look up from his laptop. "To whom?" "You know to whom," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "To Ethan." He froze. Slowly, he closed his laptop and looked at me. "No, you're not," he said. I swallowed. "Yes, I am. You think you're going to stand here and tell me you're marrying that boy who serves you coffee, and I'm going to smile and pay for a wedding?" "I didn't ask you to pay," I said quickly. "We can have something simple. Small." He laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Of course it will be simple. Poor people don't have big weddings." "Dad, stop calling him that," I snapped. "He's not just poor. He's He's a nobody, my father said, his voice rising. He has no name, no assets, no network. He is not your equal. I'm not marrying a bank account, I shot back. I'm marrying a person. He stepped closer, his face inches from mine. You are throwing away everything for a fantasy. You think love will protect you when bills pile up? When you're sick? When you have children? When you need security? Love doesn't sign checks, Clara. I know that, I said, even though my voice shook. But love also doesn't threaten to cut someone off unless they obey. You keep talking about security, but what you offer isn't security. It's a leash. His jaw clenched. So that's what you think of me. A man who put a roof over your head, clothes on your back. I'm grateful, I said, tears in my eyes. I am. But gratitude doesn't mean I owe you my entire life. It doesn't mean I have to marry someone you pick like a business deal. You're too emotional to think straight, he said coldly. This is why women shouldn't run companies. They confuse feelings with strategy. The slap of those words hit harder than any physical blow. I'm not asking for your blessing, I said quietly. I'm informing you. We're getting married. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes scanning my face like he was trying to see if I was bluffing. Then his expression changed. It became calm. Too calm. Very well, he said. If you want to live like the poor, you will live like the poor. A chill ran down my spine. What does that mean? It means, he said, walking back to his desk, that from the day you marry him, you will no longer receive a cent from me. Your allowance, gone. Your company credit card, gone. Your position here, terminated. If you choose to tie yourself to a man with nothing, you will both start from nothing. You can't just fire me because I'm getting married, I protested. I can fire anyone I want in my own company, he replied. Or did you think your position was based on merit? The words stung because part of me had wondered the same thing. You're punishing me for choosing my own life, I whispered. No, he said. I'm letting you have the life you chose. You want to be with him? Fine. But don't come crawling back when the bills arrive and your cafe prince can't save you. Dad. He held up a hand. You have until the wedding to change your mind. After that, you're on your own. Tears spilled down my cheeks. You're really going to throw away your daughter over this? His eyes were cold. No. You're the one walking away. Gaslighting. Twisting everything so that somehow, the cruel decisions still looked like my fault. I walked out of his study on shaky legs, clutching the edge of the staircase to keep from falling. I felt like the house itself was watching me, deciding if I still belonged. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of chaos and quiet miracles. We couldn't afford a big venue, so Ethan's boss offered the cafe as a reception space for free. My college friends helped decorate with fairy lights and borrowed tablecloths. Maria, our housekeeper, secretly slipped me an envelope with some cash she'd saved. For emergencies, she whispered. Don't tell your father. My aunt flew in from out of state and cried when she saw my second-hand dress. Not because it was cheap, but because she said, "You look happy for once, and that's priceless." My father refused to attend any planning. He didn't ask about the date, the place, the dress. The only thing he did was send me a message through his assistant. If you change your mind, the offer is still there. Break it off, and we'll pretend this never happened. I blocked the number for a week just so I wouldn't stare at it and guess myself. The night before the wedding, I sat on the floor of my tiny rented room. I had already moved out of the house, staying with my aunt for a while, and looked through an old photo album. There was Dad, smiling, carrying me on his shoulders when I was little. There was Mom, laughing, her eyes soft. There were birthdays, Christmases, vacations. Am I doing the right thing? I whispered to the empty room. My aunt knocked on the door and poked her head in. You're not running away, are you? She joked softly. I shook my head. I'm just scared. She sat beside me and put an arm around my shoulders. Being scared doesn't mean it's wrong. It means it's big. And big things are always scary. What if Dad is right? I admitted. What if we struggle and I regret walking away from all that security? She sighed. Let me tell you something about your father. He likes to act like he's God, handing out blessings and punishments. But he's just a man with money and a lot of fear. He's terrified of losing control. He can't imagine a world where someone chooses love over his approval. Tears blurred my vision. What if I miss him? You will, she said. Missing someone doesn't mean you should go back to being controlled by them. It just means you're human. She squeezed my hand. Clara, you have to decide what kind of life you can live with. A life in a big house, walking on eggshells, or a life in a smaller place, walking freely. I thought about Ethan's face when he talked about our future. The way he said, we, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I want to walk freely, I whispered. Then tomorrow you walk, she said. And you don't look back. My father did show up at the wedding. But not in the way I'd hoped. We held the ceremony in a small community hall near the cafe. The decorations were simple but beautiful. Wildflowers in jars, white chairs, fairy lights. My friends had done an incredible job with almost no budget. As I stood at the end of the aisle, my heart pounding, I saw Ethan waiting at the front in his slightly better fitting suit. His eyes were shining. For a moment, everything else faded away. We exchanged vows that made half the room cry. Ethan promised to be my partner in every struggle, to never use money as a weapon. I promised to stand by him even when life was harsh, to build something real together. We said, I do, the room cheered, and for a few precious minutes, it felt like we'd done something brave and beautiful. Then the microphone crackled, and I heard a voice I knew too well. May I say a few words? My father asked. He had arrived halfway through the reception, walking in like he owned the place, wearing his most expensive suit. People had parted for him instinctively, like he carried his own gravity. The DJ, clearly intimidated, handed him the microphone. Dad, I said, stepping forward. Please don't. He held up a hand. I'm just going to congratulate my daughter. Ethan squeezed my hand. Let him talk, he whispered. Maybe he changed his mind. Some small, foolish part of me believed that. I let myself hope, just for a second, that maybe this would be the moment he softened, that he'd say he loved me more than his pride. My father took a deep breath and looked around at the room, the simple decorations, the cheap chairs, the mismatched plates. Well, he began, smiling tightly. This is cozy. Some guests chuckled nervously. I want to congratulate my daughter Clara, he continued. She's always been strong-willed, determined. When she was little, she used to insist on picking her own clothes. Now, she insists on picking her own husband. He turned to look at Ethan, his eyes raking over his suit, his shoes, the room. And what a choice she has made, he said. A man with no family name, no company, no assets. A man whose future is as uncertain as the coffee orders he takes every day. Truly, she has followed her heart. The room went silent. I felt my face burning. Dad, that's enough, I said, my voice low. He ignored me, still speaking into the microphone. Since my daughter has chosen love over security, emotion over logic, I want to make one thing very clear, for her sake, and for everyone here. He looked at me then, straight in the eyes. If you insist on marrying a broke man, he said, his voice echoing through the hall, then from this moment on you're no longer my daughter, and you'll never see a cent of my money again. The words hit me like a physical blow. People gasped. Someone dropped a fork. Maria, standing at the back, covered her mouth with her apron. Ethan stepped forward, his jaw clenched. Sir, that's not necessary. My father turned to him. And you, he said, pointing. You may enjoy this little victory now. But when the bills come, when reality hits, don't you dare send my daughter to me asking for help. You wanted to be the man in her life? Then be a man. Take care of her with whatever you can scrape together. Dad, stop it. I cried. You're humiliating us. I'm stating the truth, he said calmly. You wanted independence, Clara. You have it now. Congratulations. He handed the microphone back to the DJ, turned on his heel, and walked out of the hall without looking back. Ethan stood there, shaking with rage. His hands were fists at his sides. I'm so sorry, I whispered, my whole body trembling. I'm so sorry. He turned to me, his eyes softening. Hey, he said quietly. Look at me. I could barely lift my head. We knew this might happen, he said. Maybe not this exact nightmare, but something like it. This isn't on you. This is on him. Tears spilled down my face. He really meant it. I'm cut off. From everything. Then we start from nothing, Ethan said. Together. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But as the guests slowly pretended nothing had happened and the music started again, I felt something inside me crumble. That day, in front of everyone, my father didn't just cut me off financially. He erased my role in that house in front of my eyes. And I had no idea that the same man who walked out on me at my wedding would be sitting in my small, worn-out living room just 6 months later, desperately begging my poor husband for a deal. I walked away from my rich CEO dad to marry Ethan, a poor barista building his own software. At our small wedding, my father grabbed the microphone and publicly cut me off from his money and his company, erasing me from his world in front of everyone. When the music finally stopped and the last guest went home, I changed out of my dress in a bathroom that smelled faintly of cleaning fluid and cheap soap. The fairy lights were still on in the hall, sparkling over half-empty plates and wilting flowers. It looked like every low-budget wedding photo you've ever seen online, the kind people in my dad's circle would share in group chats and laugh at. Ethan stood in the doorway, jacket slung over his arm, tie loosened, hair a little messy from dancing. Mrs. Parker, he said quietly, trying the new name on like it might fall apart in his mouth. I smiled despite the ache in my chest. Don't make promises you can't afford, Mr. Parker. He walked over and pulled me into a hug. I can't afford much, he murmured into my hair, but I can afford to love you and annoy you for the rest of your life. That's something. I laughed, but my throat was tight. We really did it, huh? We did, he said. Now we just have to survive the part after the credits. If this were a movie, the end screen would have rolled right there, frozen on our embrace. Real life doesn't fade to black. It hands you rent, electric bills, and a broken refrigerator. Our first home was a one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. The carpet in the hallway was worn, the elevator made a worrying sound every time it stopped, and the neighbors' arguments traveled through the walls way too easily. Our kitchen was barely big enough for 2 people to stand in without bumping into each other. But the first morning I woke up there, with light leaking through the thin curtains and Ethan snoring softly beside me, I felt something I'd never felt in the big house. Peace. Then my phone started vibrating with notifications, and reality came crashing back. There were messages from numbers I recognized and numbers I didn't. Co-workers, cousins, college acquaintances, even some distant relatives who hadn't messaged me in years. Is it true you're cut off? Your dad must be devastated. Why would you humiliate him like that? Can you really live without your inheritance? I scrolled until my chest tightened. The worst ones weren't even from strangers. They were from people who acted like they knew the whole story. One of my dad's executives, Mr. Lewis, had texted, "You put him in a difficult position tonight." People were watching. Try to understand his side. His side. The man who grabbed a microphone at my wedding and publicly disowned me apparently had a side that needed defending. I threw the phone onto the bed and pressed my hands over my face. You okay? Ethan asked, his voice sleepy. Just reading how I ruined my father's life, I muttered. He reached for my hand and squeezed it. You didn't ruin anything. You just refused to be another asset on his balance sheet. He's telling everyone I embarrassed him, I said. He's going to make sure the story is that I abandoned him for some poor guy. Ethan sighed. Of course he is. Rich people hate being seen as anything but the victim. The words stung because they were true. I could already imagine the conversations. My dad acting heartbroken, telling people he tried everything, that his ungrateful daughter threw it all away for a fantasy. That's how abusers stay clean. They cry in the right rooms. The first month was rough. My company email access was revoked the Monday after the wedding. No warning, no meeting, just an error message when I tried to log in. My corporate credit card stopped working. The sleek car I'd been driving, a company asset, obviously, was taken back. An assistant I'd known for years sent a short message. I'm sorry, Clara. HR said your position has been terminated effective immediately. I had no choice. I wanted to scream, you always have a choice, but I knew that wasn't entirely true. Fear is a powerful leash. Rent, food, transport. Suddenly these were numbers I had to actually sit down and calculate, not just abstract concepts other people handled. Ethan worked double shifts at the cafe. I picked up a part-time job doing basic admin at a small local insurance agency. The pay was nothing like what I made at Donovan Real Estate, but it was something with my name on it. There were nights we ate instant noodles with an egg on top and called it fancy. There were mornings the hot water cut out halfway through my shower. There were days I stared at our bank balance and felt panic crawl up my spine. And there were voicemails from my father. I didn't block his number completely. I couldn't. Some part of me still hoped he'd call and say, I'm sorry. Come home. Let's start over. He called, but the words were never that. You'll get tired, he said in one message. You think love will keep you warm when the heater breaks? You think that boy will still look at you the same when you're late on rent? In another, people are talking, Clara. They say you threw away your future for a man who can barely take care of himself. I hope the romance is worth it when reality hits. In a third, I heard you're working at some tiny office now. Is this what you wanted? You could have had a corner office and a driver. You traded it for paperwork and buses. Every message had the same theme. You'll regret this. You'll come back. When you do, remember that I was right. This is what gaslighting looks like when it wears a $1,000 suit. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes. It just whispers. You'll see. I'm the only one who really knows what's best for you. On the nights when the fear got too loud, Ethan would pull me close. We're not going to drown, he would say. We'll paddle slower than the yachts, sure, but we'll still move. You could have had an easier life without me, I told him once. He laughed softly. You think I wanted a life without you? I wanted a life that was mine. You're part of that. There's no without you in my plan. Rock bottom isn't always one dramatic moment. Sometimes it's the slow realization that everything that used to feel normal was actually a luxury you never understood. The turning point for me came on a rainy Thursday, holding a cracked umbrella, waiting for the bus that was late again. My shoes were soaked. My hair was frizzy. My phone buzzed with another message from my father, reminding me how far I'd fallen. And suddenly, instead of crying, I laughed. Because yes, I had fallen. From a high, shiny place. But the ground I was walking on now, that ugly, wet, difficult ground, was real. For the first time in my life didn't belong to the Donovan Company. It belonged to me. If my life was breaking apart, Ethan's life was slowly knitting itself into something bigger. His supply chain app, which he'd been tinkering with for years, started to attract real attention. It began with the cafe owner, Mr. Owens, who had been using Ethan's software for months to track coffee beans, milk, pastries, everything. One afternoon, Mr. Owens noticed something. Our waste is down, he said, staring at his spreadsheet. And our profits are up. I haven't changed suppliers. The only thing that's different is your app. Ethan shrugged, trying to play it cool. The system just helps you order smarter. No magic. Whatever it is, it's working, Mr. Owens said. I showed it to my friend who manages 3 cafes across town. He wants to talk to you. That friend introduced Ethan to the owner of a small chain of coffee shops, who ran a pilot test in 3 locations. Within 2 months, their food wastage dropped, their inventory errors went down, and their staff stopped having to guess how much to order. Ethan came home one evening practically vibrating. They want to roll it out to all 12 of their cafes, he said, dropping his backpack on the floor. And they asked if I'd be open to a revenue share model instead of a flat fee. I stared at him, wide-eyed. Like real monthly revenue? Like real monthly revenue, he said, grinning. Not billionaire money, but not pocket change either. We sat at the tiny table in our kitchen, calculators out, scribbling numbers on a notepad that already had ramen stains. If each location pays this amount, I said, doing the math, and you take this percentage, then, Ethan, this could actually cover our rent in a few months. Maybe more. He leaned back, covering his face with his hands. I don't want to get ahead of myself. It's just one chain. One city. Yeah, I said quietly, looking at him. But it's ours. Not my dad's. Not anyone else's. Ours. We decided to give the app a real name instead of the temporary file name he'd been using. What about Beantrack? I suggested. He grimaced. Sounds like a kid's counting game. We threw around ideas for an hour until we settled on Linear, a nod to the supply line and the clean, simple interface he'd designed. I started helping him after work, using the business skills I'd learned in my father's company. Only this time, it felt like I was using them for something I believed in. I wrote emails, designed simple pitch decks, and helped structure contracts. I couldn't lie. There was a satisfying irony in using the training my father paid for to build a product he would have laughed at. One evening, as we were reviewing a contract, Ethan frowned. This clause here, about intellectual property. I want to make sure nobody can just swoop in and claim this belongs to them, he said. A chill ran through me. Intellectual property. Suddenly I remembered the clause in my father's inheritance documents. The one about exclusive development rights, under the Donovan umbrella. I stood up and went to the bedroom, rummaging through the drawer where I kept that old USB drive. Ethan followed, watching as I plugged it into my laptop. What's that? He asked. Evidence of how much my father likes owning things, I muttered. I pulled up the scanned copy of the trust documents I'd saved months before my wedding, scrolling until I found the clause that had bothered me. Here, I said, tapping the screen. It says any intellectual property I develop or significantly contribute to while working under Donovan Real Estate belongs to them. At the time I thought it didn't matter, but I looked at him. If your app ever gets big, I wouldn't put it past my father to try and claim that because I did some work for you, he has a stake. Ethan's expression darkened. He can't do that. This was my project long before you even knew I existed. I know, I said. But knowing him, he'll twist whatever he can. We decided to get a professional opinion. Through my aunt, we found a lawyer named Ms. Carter, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who had zero patience for people who used contracts as weapons. We sat in her small office, surrounded by shelves of thick law books. She read the clause slowly, then exhaled. This is aggressive, she said, tapping the page. Is it legal? I asked. Technically, yes, she replied. But it's also very broad and could be challenged. The key phrase here is, under the Donovan Real Estate umbrella, and material contribution. Your boyfriend's app was developed independently, on his own time, with his own resources, correct? Yes, Ethan said quickly. I started it years before I met Clara. She's helped me recently with presentations and contracts, but the code, the concept, the architecture, those are mine. Ms. Carter nodded. Then your father would have a very hard time making a legitimate claim over it. If he tries, it would look like harassment or an attempt to intimidate his daughter and her husband into giving up equity. Courts don't love that. A flicker of hope lit up inside me. So if he comes after us, you don't run, she said. You document. You keep emails, messages, contracts. You build a trail that shows how separate this business is from his. And you record any threats he makes about ownership. We left her office with a folder of notes and a new plant in our story. The clear separation of Ethan's intellectual property. At the time, it seemed like simple protection. Just in case. We had no idea how much my father's empire was about to crumble, or how quickly he would reach for the very thing he'd once called small and cute to try and save it. I found out my dad's company was in trouble by accident. It was a Tuesday at the insurance office. I was making coffee in the tiny break room, staring at the cheap machine that made weak, slightly burnt, tasting coffee, when I heard my coworkers talking. Did you see the news about Donovan Real Estate? One of them, Megan, asked. I froze, my hand hovering over the sugar packet. No, what happened? The other, Josh, replied. They had another project delayed, Megan said, scrolling on her phone. Some downtown complex. The article said they've been bleeding money for months because of mismanaged contracts and supply chain problems. Investors are getting nervous. I casually stepped closer. Which article? I asked, trying to sound uninterested. Megan turned the screen so I could see. There it was, my father's company name, my last name, splashed across a business news site. The story mentioned rising costs, delays, unhappy contractors, and an outdated internal system that struggled to manage multiple simultaneous developments. There were anonymous quotes from people close to the company, saying things like, they've been resisting modernizing their operations for years. My chest tightened. Resisting modernizing. That sounded exactly like my father. I went home that night and did what I hadn't done in months. I searched my father's company online like I was just any stranger. More articles popped up. Some talked about a big deal that had fallen through. Others hinted at tension within the board, whispers about whether my father was still the right person to lead. One sentence, from a longer piece, stood out. In a market where efficiency and data-driven decision-making are crucial, Donovan Real Estate has been slow to adopt new technology, relying on outdated systems and manual processes. Ethan read over my shoulder. I'm not going to say he deserves this, he said slowly, but I'm also not surprised. It's like he built a beautiful car and then refused to update the engine for 20 years, I said. It looks good from the outside, but inside it's rusting. As Linnea grew, the contrast between our tiny apartment and my father's glass office building started to tilt in strange ways. We signed 2 more small cafe chains. A bakery group reached out. Ethan was invited to speak at a local small business event about using tech to reduce waste. I stood at the back of the room, watching him talk into a microphone with more composure than I'd had at any of my father's high-end events. He spoke plainly about numbers, mistakes, learning. There was no fake grandeur, no ego. After the talk, a man in a grey blazer approached him. Ethan Parker, he asked, shaking his hand. I'm Daniel Brooks. I handle operations for a mid-size restaurant group. I liked what you said about transparency in the supply chain. We've been looking for a system that isn't overkill for our size. Can we talk? That talk turned into a meeting. That meeting turned into a proposal. That proposal turned into the biggest contract Linnea had ever seen. Enough recurring revenue to make us breathe easier for the first time in months. We celebrated with cheap takeout and a bottle of grocery store sparkling juice. Do you realize what this means? I asked, lying on our threadbare couch, feet in Ethan's lap. We can finally get out of panic mode. We can plan. He smiled, tired but happy. We're still a long way from rich. I don't need rich, I said. I just need to not have a mini heart attack every time the electric bill arrives. He brushed his fingers over my ankle. Hey, Clara. Yeah. Thank you for believing in this. When your father was mocking me over dinner, I felt like I'd never be taken seriously by anyone in your world. knowing you were on my side. It mattered more than you know. I looked at him, at the man who'd been a punchline in my father's dining room and was now quietly building something solid. Just promise me one thing, I said. No matter how big this gets, we never become like him. What do you mean? He asked. Using money as a leash, I said. Making people feel small so we can feel big. Cutting off our own kid at their wedding to protect our image. Promise me we never do that. He didn't even hesitate. I promise. We sealed it with a kiss, there on our ugly couch. And somewhere across town, in a house with marble floors and cold silence, my father was starting to realize that the world he thought he controlled was slipping out of his hands. The first sign that he was getting desperate was surprisingly small. My aunt called me one evening, her voice tight. I ran into one of your father's old friends today, she said. He was fishing. For what? I asked. For news about you and Ethan, she replied. He asked if you were still playing with that little app thing. Then he said your father had mentioned that if you two were willing to come back into the fold, he might be open to discussing a partnership. I snorted. Let me guess. He framed it like a generous offer. Of course, she said. He's telling people he misses you, that he wants to rebuild the family, but you're stubborn. There it was, the victim act. He also said, my aunt added, that it's a pity your talents are being wasted on small businesses when you could be helping manage real projects. Real projects, I repeated, rolling my eyes. Because apparently helping small businesses stay afloat isn't real. Be careful, Clara, my aunt said. He's not just being sentimental. When he starts talking about partnerships with people he used to dismiss, it means he needs something. 2 weeks later, we found out exactly how much he needed it. We received an email from a large property management firm asking for a demo of Linear. The domain name made my stomach flip. I recognized it as one of Donovan Real Estate's competitors. Is this a joke? I asked, staring at the screen. Ethan shook his head. Doesn't look like it. They wrote, we've heard about your work with mid-size F&B groups and are curious how your system could be adapted for construction material management. Construction. Real estate. The world my father refused to modernize. We set up a meeting. In a sleek conference room that reminded me too much of my old life, we showed them how Linear worked. Ethan did the tech talk. I handled the business side. When we finished, the operations director, a woman named Chloe Martin, leaned back in her chair. This is exactly the kind of thing we've been looking at building in-house, she said. But you're already 2 years ahead of where we are. We'd rather partner than start from scratch. My heart pounded. What would a partnership look like? We'd start with a pilot on 3 of our smaller developments, she said. If the numbers look good, we roll out to all domestic projects. In return, we'd invest capital into your company and help you scale. Ethan's eyes widened. That's huge. Chloe smiled. We think so. And frankly, in a market where some of our competitors are struggling, we want to stay ahead. I knew exactly which competitor she meant. We didn't give an answer that day. We took the proposal home, spread it out on our small kitchen table, and stared at the numbers. This would change everything, I whispered. We'd have to hire people. Maybe get an actual office that isn't our living room. It also paints a big target on our backs, Ethan said. If we partner with them, your father will see it as betrayal with extra seasoning. After what he did at our wedding, he doesn't get to lecture us about loyalty, I said. But yeah. He's going to lose his mind. We took the proposal to Ms. Carter first. She went through every clause like a surgeon. It's a solid offer, she said. You'll have to give up some equity, but you'll gain more stability and reach. As long as you keep your IP rights protected, which this contract does, you'll be in a good position. And my father? I asked. If he tries to claim I'm developing this under his umbrella. She smiled thinly. Then we'll remind him you no longer work for him, you don't receive money from him, and he publicly disowned you in front of dozens of witnesses. That umbrella is closed. We signed the partnership. Linear officially moved from scrappy side project to real company. Our living room filled with boxes of equipment, new laptops, whiteboards. We hired a junior developer named Lucas, a project coordinator named Jenna, and a part-time accountant named Mrs. Green who treated us like her kids. Our world expanded in ways my father had never imagined for me. And then, right on cue, he tried to yank it back. The message came as an email, not from him, but from his legal team. To Ethan Parker and Clara Parker. Subject: Intellectual Property Clarification. Linear Software. I knew it was bad before I even opened it. My hands shook as I clicked. The email said that Donovan Real Estate had become aware of our software and believed that it may fall under the scope of prior agreements and developmental obligations related to Ms. Clara Donovan, now Parker, during her tenure under Donovan Real Estate. They were requesting a meeting to discuss potential ownership claims and possible licensing arrangements, and hinted that if we did not amicably resolve this confusion, they would explore legal options. I read it 3 times, my vision blurring at the edges. This is a threat, I whispered. He's trying to scare us into giving him a piece. Ethan's jaw tightened. He called it worthless when it was just a cafe tool. Now that bigger players are interested, suddenly it might be his. The old panic started to rise in my chest, the feeling of being a cornered child. Ms. Carter, thankfully, did not panic. This letter is full of fluff and very little substance, she said when we showed it to her. They're fishing. They want to see if you'll fold. But can they actually drag us into court? Ethan asked. Anyone can file a suit, she said, but that doesn't mean they'll win. More importantly, I don't think they want a public fight. Your father's company is already under scrutiny. The last thing he needs is headlines about him harassing his estranged daughter and her small business. So what do we do? I asked, my voice small. We respond, she said. Politely. Firmly. We outline the timeline of your development, emphasize Clara's lack of material contribution to the core technology, and assert your independent ownership. We also mention that any further attempts to claim ownership without basis will be considered harassment. And if he escalates? Ethan pressed. She shrugged. Then we let him. And we bring out everything we have. Including that little clause he wrote about you only developing IP under his umbrella while you were financially dependent on him. You're not that anymore. His own cruelty is your best defense. It was the first time someone had said my father's cruelty could work in my favor. We sent the response. A week later, instead of another email, he showed up at our door. I was barefoot, in old sweatpants and one of Ethan's oversized t-shirts, when I heard the knock. Ethan was in the tiny second bedroom we'd turned into a makeshift office, on a call with a developer. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door, expecting a neighbor. My father stood in the hallway, out of place under the flickering fluorescent light, his expensive coat and polished shoes clashing with the peeling paint and the smell of someone cooking garlic down the hall. For a moment, both of us just stared. He looked thinner. There were new lines around his mouth, a heaviness in his shoulders I hadn't seen before. But his eyes were the same, sharp, assessing, calculating. Clara, he said. My throat closed up. How did you get my address? He raised an eyebrow. You think I can't find my own daughter? I stood there, gripping the edge of the door, heart hammering. Behind him, Mrs. Patel from across the hall walked by carrying groceries. She glanced between us curiously, no idea she'd just walked through a scene that could have been on a drama channel. My father cleared his throat. Are you going to invite me in, or are we going to have this conversation in front of your neighbors? Every instinct told me to slam the door. But another part of me, older, trained to obey, still craving his approval, stepped aside. Come in, I said quietly. He stepped into our small living room, looking around with a mixture of discomfort and disbelief. His gaze landed on the second-hand couch, the stack of paperwork on the coffee table, the cheap curtains we hadn't gotten around to replacing. "This is where you live?" he asked. "It's where we're starting," I said. He made a non-committal sound and sat down, the couch springs protesting under his weight. Ethan appeared in the doorway, taking off his headset. He froze when he saw who was sitting in our living room. "Mr. Donovan," he said cautiously. My father looked up. "Parker." There was a heavy pause. "This is unexpected," Ethan said, coming to stand beside me. My father cleared his throat again, as if the words he was about to say physically hurt him. "I saw your response to our legal email," he began. "Your lawyer is confident." "We have reason to be," Ethan replied evenly. My father's jaw ticked. "I didn't come here to argue about who owns what. I came here to talk about something larger." I folded my arms. "You mean your company?" His eyes flashed. "You've been reading the news. It's kind of hard to miss when your last name is in the headlines," I said. He looked down at his hands. For a second, he actually seemed human. Smaller. Vulnerable. "We're experiencing some challenges," he said finally. "Cash flow issues. Delays. Certain partners have decided to explore other options. Like your competitors who are now in talks with us," Ethan said quietly. My father shot him a look. "Yes. Like them. So what do you want, Dad?" I asked. "Because if you're here to threaten us in person..." He cut me off, the words bursting out of him. "I'm here to ask for a deal." If someone had dropped a plate, I wouldn't have heard it over the sound of my own heartbeat. "What?" I whispered. He exhaled slowly, like admitting it was physically painful. "Your software. Linear. I've seen the numbers. I know who you've partnered with. It's impressive." The word sounded like it had been dragged over sandpaper. He continued, "Our internal systems are a mess. We've lost money on 3 projects in a row because of mismanaged materials and inventory. The board is losing confidence." He looked at Ethan. "I came to propose an exclusive contract," he said. "We would use your software across all Donovan real estate projects. In return, you'd receive a generous fee and we'd consider an equity stake." I stared at him. This was the man who'd stood at my wedding and declared my husband worthless. Now he was sitting on our cheap couch, asking that same man to save his empire. Ethan glanced at me, then back at my father. "Why us?" he asked quietly. "You mocked this idea at your own dinner table." My father's mouth tightened. "Because the world is changing whether I like it or not. And because the partners I used to rely on are either too slow or already working with your competitors. You've somehow positioned yourself in a space where I need you more than you need me." Hearing him say that out loud felt surreal. Part of me wanted to smile, to savor this moment, to finally see him humbled. But another part of me, the part that had once wanted nothing more than his love, felt sick. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You cut me off. You fired me. You fired me as your daughter in front of everyone. And now you're asking my husband for a deal to fix the mess you made by refusing to modernize." He flinched. Just a little. "I'm trying to do what's best for the company." "There it is," I said. "The company." He looked at me. "This is bigger than our personal issues, Clara." "No," I said, shaking my head. "Our personal issues are exactly why you're in this position. You treated people like they were disposable, like their loyalty was guaranteed as long as you paid them. You treated me like a pawn. You treated Ethan like dirt. And now the same nobody you humiliated is the one you need." For the first time, he looked truly shaken. "I made mistakes," he said, his voice tight. "I was harsh. But everything I did to protect what I built. To protect you." "You didn't protect me," I said. "You tried to own me." He looked away. Ethan cleared his throat. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. Spell it out. My father straightened, slipping back into negotiation mode. Exclusive rights to your software for all Donovan real estate projects for the next 5 years, he said. We'll pay you a licensing fee plus a percentage of cost savings. We'll also issue you shares. A minority stake, but significant enough to be meaningful. And what do you expect in return besides the software? Ethan asked. My father hesitated. Given Clara's background, we would expect her to oversee implementation on our side. In an advisory capacity. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. You want me to come back and clean up your mess after you erased me? He winced. I chose my words poorly that day. No, I said. You chose them very clearly. He ran a hand through his hair, looking more and more worn. Clara, he said softly, the board is pressuring me. If I don't show them a concrete plan to turn things around, they'll force me to step down. Do you understand what that means? Everything I've worked for. There are other software providers, Ethan said carefully. Why not go to them? Because they don't have what you have, my father snapped, then caught himself. They don't have your track record with mid-size operations. They don't have your wife's understanding of our internal structure. And frankly, they don't have the trust of the partners we're trying to win back. So that was it. The great Richard Donovan, who used to act like God, was now sitting in my tiny living room, trying not to choke on the word need. I suddenly understood something. This wasn't just about technology. This was about him trying to regain control. If he could bring us back into the fold, even as partners, he could spin it as a story of reconciliation. He could tell the world he forgave his stubborn daughter and her husband and brought them into the empire. He could be the hero of his own narrative again. I have a condition, I said. Both men looked at me. If we even consider this, I said, there will be no back into the fold. I will not be your employee. Ethan will not be your subordinate. We will be an external vendor, nothing more. You will not use this deal as a way to control our company or our lives. My father frowned. You're being dramatic. There, I said quietly. That's the problem. You still think my boundaries are drama. Ethan took my hand. We'll discuss your proposal with our lawyer and our board, he said. We have investors now. We can't make decisions alone. The way my father's eyes widened told me he hadn't realized that. Investors, he repeated. Yes, Ethan said. People who believed in this cute little app, when you were still laughing at it. My father looked at me, something like panic flickering over his features. You're really going to let my company fall, he said, just because you're angry at me? There it was. Reversing victim and perpetrator. I'm not making your company fall, I said quietly. You did that yourself, one arrogant decision at a time. We're not obligated to be your life raft just because we share DNA. He stood up abruptly. Think about it, he said. If you care about the legacy your mother and I started, you'll help. That hit like a punch. Using my mother's memory as a weapon. He walked to the door, then paused. For what it's worth, he said without turning around, I never thought you'd make it this far on your own. I let out a slow breath. That's the difference between you and Ethan, I said. He always did. The door clicked shut behind him. Ethan squeezed my hand. Do we help him? He asked softly. I stared at the door for a long moment. I don't know yet, I said. But if we do, it's going to be on our terms. Not his. Ms. Carter's reaction to my father's proposal was amused. So the man who tried to scare you with a vague IP claim is now begging for an exclusive contract, she said. How the mighty have tripped over their own ego. Can we help him without handing him a knife to stab us with later? Ethan asked. You can, she said, if you structure this right. No exclusivity. No automatic equity. No clauses that give him control over your roadmap. And absolutely no language about this being a family reintegration. This is a business deal, not therapy. What if he refuses? I asked. She gave me a look. He came to your apartment, Clara. He swallowed his pride enough to sit on that couch. That means he's more desperate than he wants you to know. If you stand firm, he'll either agree to fair terms, or he'll drown. We drafted a counter-proposal. No exclusivity. We would work with his competitors if we wanted. A standard licensing fee, no special family rate. A clear boundary that implementation would be handled by a neutral project team, not by me acting as his unpaid fixer. We also added one more clause, suggested by Ms. Carter. Any public communications about this partnership must be jointly approved, and shall not misrepresent the history of the relationship between the parties. In other words, he couldn't lie and say he'd been supporting us all along. We sent the proposal. 2 days later, instead of signing quietly, my father did what he always did when he felt cornered. He tried to flip the script. He called an emergency board meeting. And this time, I was invited. Walking into the Donovan boardroom after all those months felt like stepping into a ghost version of my old life. The same long table, the same leather chairs, the same city view through floor to ceiling windows. But the air was different, thicker, heavier. Board members glanced up as I entered. Some looked guilty. Some looked curious. A few looked annoyed. My father sat at the head of the table, his expression carefully neutral. "Thank you for joining us, Clara," he said. "I'm here representing Linnea," I replied, my voice steady. "Not as your daughter." A small flicker of something crossed his face. Ethan sat beside me, a laptop and a stack of documents in front of him. Ms. Carter sat on my other side, her calm presence like armor. One of the older board members, Mr. Jensen, cleared his throat. "Richard has brought us a proposal," he said, glancing between my father and us. "He believes a partnership with your company could help address some of our operational issues." "By some, he means all of them," another board member, Ms. Nguyen, muttered. My father shot her a look. He began with a presentation, graphs showing cost overruns, delayed projects, unhappy clients. He didn't admit it was his stubbornness that caused them, but everyone in the room knew. Then he pulled up a slide with Linnea's logo. "This is where we have an opportunity," he said. "My daughter's company has developed a system that could streamline our supply chain. I believe that, combined with our resources, we can turn these numbers around." He turned to the board. "Of course, there are some complexities, given our personal history. But I am willing to set those aside for the good of the company." It was subtle, but I saw what he was doing. Painting himself as the bigger person, the magnanimous father willing to forgive his wayward daughter for the sake of the business. Ms. Carter leaned in and whispered, "Wait for it." Mr. Jensen looked at us. "What are your thoughts?" Ethan glanced at me, then at the board. "We appreciate the opportunity," he said. "But if we're going to work together, it has to be on clear professional terms. That's why we sent a counter-proposal." "And it was unacceptable," my father cut in. "No exclusivity. No preferential treatment. You expect us to share proprietary operational data with a vendor who might also work with our competitors." "We already are," Ethan said calmly. "That's part of why you came to us. Because you saw what we did with them." A murmur rippled through the room. My father's jaw clenched. "You're putting my company at risk." "With respect," Ms. Carter said, finally speaking up, "your company was at risk long before my clients wrote a single line of code." A couple of board members tried to hide their smiles. My father glared at her. "Who invited you to speak?" "She's our legal counsel," I said. "If you want to deal with Linnea, you deal with her too." Mr. Jensen cleared his throat. "Let's stay focused." Ms. Nguyen looked at me. "Clara, we've raised concerns for years about modernizing our systems. Your father kept saying we'd get to it. We didn't. Now we're bleeding money. Frankly, I don't care about the family drama. I care about not losing my investment. Same, another member, Mr. Patel, said. If Linear can help, we should make it work. But we also can't put the company in a position where one vendor has us by the throat. That's exactly what I'm trying to avoid, my father said. If we give them too much power. With respect, Ethan interrupted. We're the ones at risk if we tie ourselves exclusively to a single client who's already unstable. Our investors would never allow it. My father's eyes flashed. Investors? You're a glorified start-up. Don't act like. Enough, Ms. Nguyen said sharply. This isn't about your pride, Richard. This was the moment. I took a breath and pulled out a folder from my bag. There's something the board should know, I said. My father stiffened. Clara, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time, I said, my voice steady. Because this isn't just about a partnership. It's about how you've been running this company and how far you're willing to go to keep control. I slid copies of the old trust documents across the table, the ones with the overreaching IP clause. Months before my wedding, I said, my father tried to get me to sign updated inheritance documents that included this clause. It states that any intellectual property I develop under the Donovan umbrella belongs to the company. He also tried to imply recently, through his legal team, that my husband's software might fall under that umbrella. One of the board members read the clause and winced. This is aggressive. Yes, Ms. Carter said. It's also evidence of a pattern. When my clients started to succeed independently, Mr. Donovan's first instinct wasn't to collaborate. It was to threaten them with vague ownership claims. Not exactly the mindset of a leader who inspires innovation. My father's face was turning red. I was protecting our interests, he said. She was using skills and knowledge gained here too. To build a life you didn't control, I said. Yes. That's called being an adult. I pulled out another document, a printed copy of the email his legal team had sent, hinting at exploring legal options. This is how he approached us, I told the board. Not with respect. Not with acknowledgement that he'd humiliated us in public. With veiled threats. You should know that, because the way he treats his own daughter and her husband is probably not that different from the way he treats contractors and partners when he feels threatened. Silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. Ms. Nguyen looked at my father. Is this accurate? He swallowed. I may have overreacted, but everything I did was to safeguard the company. By publicly disowning your daughter at her wedding? Mr. Patel asked, eyebrows raised. Do you know how many people heard about that? Do you know how bad it looks when a CEO uses his own child as an example of what happens when you defy him? I kept my personal life separate from. You didn't, I said softly. You used the company money as a leash on me. You fired me as your daughter in front of clients and partners. Then, when you realized the world was changing without you, you came crawling to the same people you called worthless. He turned to me, eyes blazing. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He hissed. You wanted to watch me fall. My heart hurt. No, I said. I wanted you to grow. That landed harder than anything else I could have said. Mr. Jensen cleared his throat again. Let's bring this back to the decision we have to make, he said. We need modern systems. We have an opportunity to partner with a company that clearly knows what it's doing. The question is, under whose terms? Ms. Nguyen looked at us. Would you still be open to working with Donovan Real Estate under the conditions your lawyer proposed? Ethan nodded. Yes. As long as we're treated like any other vendor, not like rebellious children being brought back. We'll do our job. We'll deliver results. But we won't be controlled. All eyes turned to my father. He looked around the table, realizing something he'd never imagined. He wasn't the unquestioned king of this room anymore. If we don't do this, Ms. Nguyen said quietly, we may not survive the next 2 years. Our competitors will. Probably with Linear's help. I'm not willing to watch my investment sink because your pride can't handle signing a contract with your son-in-law. My father's lips pressed into a thin line. In addition, Mr. Patel said, I want to propose a separate motion. That we consider appointing a COO or even a potential successor who has a more agile approach to operations. The word successor hung in the air. My father snapped his head toward him. You're pushing me out. We're trying to keep this company alive, Mr. Patel replied. Sometimes that means changing how we lead. For the first time in my life, I watched my father look small. Not because someone humiliated him at a wedding, but because his own decisions had cornered him. He looked at me. For a moment, I saw the man who used to lift me onto his shoulders, not the CEO who saw me as an asset. You'd really stand there and let them take this away from me, he whispered. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. I didn't take anything from you, I said. You built this, Dad. You also built the wall between us. All I did was climb over it. Silence. Finally, he looked at the board. Do what you want, he said, his voice hoarse. If signing this deal is what it takes to calm you down, fine. If you want to bring in another executive to babysit me, fine. But don't forget who made this company what it is. We won't, Ms. Nguyen said. We'll remember both parts, the building and the breaking. The board voted. They approved the partnership with Linear on our terms. They also voted to bring in a new COO with authority over operational modernization, with a clear succession plan that didn't automatically crown my father king forever. By the end of the meeting, the truth stood in the middle of all of us. He couldn't run from it anymore. In the months that followed, my life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became mine. Linear grew. We hired more people, moved into a modest office with big windows and mismatched chairs. We put plants on the windowsills and sticky notes on the walls and laughed at how uncorporate it all felt. Working with Donovan Real Estate was complicated. On paper, it was just another client. In practice, it was me walking back into the building where I'd once been the CEO's daughter, now as an external consultant whose name was on a different company's letterhead. Some employees still whispered when I walked by. Some looked at me with pity, others with admiration, some with resentment. I couldn't control any of that. What I could control was how I showed up. I refused to attend meetings alone with my father. All our interactions were either through email or in group settings. Whenever he tried to throw in a personal jab, "You look thinner, are you eating well in that little apartment?" I would redirect to the agenda. Let's focus on the system rollout, I'd say. We have a lot to cover. The software did its job. Material orders became more accurate. Waste went down. Project managers started trusting the data instead of relying on guesswork. Within a year, Donovan Real Estate's bleeding slowed. The board knew exactly why. Ethan never gloated. He didn't become smug or arrogant. He just kept doing the work, kept improving the system, kept pushing for features that made life easier for people on the ground, not just executives. At home, our life changed in smaller, sweeter ways. We upgraded to a slightly bigger apartment with a kitchen that could fit both of us without accidental elbow injuries. We bought a couch that didn't squeak. We replaced the flickering light with one that actually turned on when you pressed the switch. One morning, as I stood in our new kitchen making coffee, Ethan came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "Guess what?" he murmured. "What?" I asked, leaning back into him. "We just crossed the revenue threshold I wrote on a napkin the day we signed our first big contract," he said. "We're officially stable." I laughed. "Is that the technical term?" "It is in my heart," he said. We started talking about things we'd avoided before, like maybe having a kid one day. The idea terrified me. Not because of diapers or sleepless nights, but because I was determined to never repeat my father's patterns. "If we ever have a child," I said one night, "I want them to know that love isn't a performance tied to money. I want them to know that if they choose a life I don't understand, I'll ask questions, not make threats." Ethan took my hand. Then you'll already be a better parent than most. As for my father, he learned that consequences don't always come as dramatic as a gavel in a courtroom. Sometimes, they come as a quieter, more painful thing: limits. He didn't lose everything. He still had money, still had a role as founder, still had people who admired him. But he no longer controlled every decision. He no longer had a guaranteed throne. He also no longer had unrestricted access to me. We spoke occasionally, mostly about work. On his birthday, I sent a polite message. When I ended up in the same room with him at a corporate event, we nodded at each other like distant colleagues. One afternoon, as I was leaving a meeting at his office, he stopped me in the hallway. "Clara," he said. I turned. Yes. He looked older than I remembered. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with late nights. "I went to see your mother's grave yesterday," he said quietly. I told her I might have been too hard on you." My throat tightened. "That's between you and her." He nodded slowly. "When I cut you off that day, at your wedding, I thought I was making you come to your senses. I thought you'd fall apart and run back. You didn't." "No," I said. "I fell apart and built something else instead." He gave a small, sad smile. "She would have liked him, you know. Ethan. He reminds me of who I was when I started. Before all of this." He gestured vaguely around him. I didn't know what to say to that. "I can't take back what I did," he continued. "I can't pretend I didn't humiliate you. I can't pretend I didn't use money like a weapon. But I'm glad you didn't break. Even if it means you don't need me the way I thought you would." People were walking past us, pretending not to listen. For once, I didn't care what they thought. "I always needed a father," I said softly. "I just didn't need a jailer." He winced. "Maybe one day you'll," he trailed off, then swallowed. "Never mind. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of what you built. Even if I don't love the way you left." It wasn't an apology, not really. It was a half step. A clumsy, incomplete thing. But I'd stopped expecting perfect from him a long time ago. "Thank you," I said. "And I'm glad you're finally letting other people help run this place. It doesn't always have to be you against the world." For a moment, we just stood there, two people in a hallway, not CEO and daughter, not enemy and victim. Just a flawed man and the woman who refused to let his flaws dictate her life anymore. I walked away before the moment could turn into something else, before he could say something that would drag us back into old patterns. At home that night, I curled up on the couch with Ethan and told him about the hallway conversation. "Do you forgive him?" he asked gently. I thought about it. "I forgive the parts that are mine to forgive," I said. "The rest, that's between him and God." Ethan nodded. "As long as forgiving doesn't mean forgetting what he's capable of." "It doesn't," I said. "It just means I'm not going to let his voice live rent-free in my head anymore." He kissed my forehead. "That sounds like the richest thing you've ever done." I smiled. Because in a way, he was right. Walking away from my father's fortune had felt like jumping off a cliff. But learning to build my own life, my own company, my own family, without using money as a chain, that made me richer than his bank account ever could. Now I know I was never really worthless. I was just stuck in a house that refused to see my value. From everything I went through, I learned that love without respect is just another cage, and money without boundaries is just another weapon. If you're in a situation where someone keeps reminding you what they've given you just to control your choices, please remember, you're allowed to build a life that doesn't depend on their approval. If you've ever gone through something similar or you want to share your own story, write it in the comments below. Don't forget to share this story with your friends, like the video, and subscribe so you don't miss the next stories.